Welcome to Kentucky Wide, a production of the Frazier History Museum. I'm Mick Sullivan.
And I'm Sarah Jemerson. This is episode 6, which marks the end of our first season. Don't worry, there's plenty more planned and coming down the pipeline, so stay tuned.
This episode is about two German immigrants who were stone carvers in the mid-1800s. One worked here in Louisville, and the other worked near Munfordville in Hart County.
If you've visited the riverfront in Louisville, you might recognize the work of Christian Heigold, who carved an elaborate face to his home in the years following Bloody Monday. Only the facade of the house remains, and it's a popular destination for photos.
Less familiar might be August Bloedner, who carved a monument, the oldest monument from the American Civil War. It sits on display at the Frazier Museum and is one of our most treasured objects. The story behind it is deep.
Cities change over time. It's inevitable as populations fluctuate and commerce and technology create opportunities. As a result, any given city's well-traveled areas can look completely different than they did to citizens of another time. One such place in the city of Louisville was known as the Point. Once upon a time, it was a thriving district east of downtown, near the shore of the Ohio at Towhead Island. Now, it doesn't exist. Not on any maps today, the bustling neighborhood once met the river at the far end east of today's waterfront park. Only two things remain from this place: the complete Paget House and a strange facade standing in a turnabout near the entrance to Louisville's botanical gardens. You'll often find people posing for photos here. It was once the remarkable and ornate front of a house on Marion Street. Nearly all of the Heigold house is long gone, but the fancy facade remains, exposed, displayed, and breezy, with windows and doors to nowhere, and ornate carvings facing River Road. Strange to our eyes, as it's missing the actual living part of the home, the house front is preserved for our benefit if we take the time to look. Marion Street, like the Point itself, no longer exists, but resident Christian Heigold was a familiar sight there. For years during the 1850s and 1860s, residents of the Point would have heard the clank and clang of his hammer and chisel. He was a stonecutter who ventured across the ocean from Germany, as had so many others like him in the years after 1848. So many came, in fact, that German immigrants of the time are remembered as 48ers. Christian Heigold, like many, brought old world skills to match with a new passion for American freedom and opportunity. He was a true patriot and firm believer in the great American experiment. Perhaps no better example of this immigrant's American patriotism can be found than on the facade to his home, where he showed that America was his America too. Its belief in freedom and liberty for all was his own as well. In the mid-19th century, America was still struggling to define itself. The Civil War, just a few years away, further complicated this crisis of identity. During such times, what does it mean to be patriotic? To whom? To what cause? Who even had a right to this claim, that of patriot, of American? The Point neighborhood, situated on the Ohio River, located east of downtown Louisville, was an interesting case study to ask these questions. Many of New Orleans' elite moved to the area during the 1840s. Wealthy French immigrants came for the fortune the Ohio River could bring, not to mention the area's relative freedom from the heat and rampant disease common down south. They immediately constructed opulent mansions, mostly around now-gone Fulton Street, which soon earned the nickname Frenchman's Row. Things would soon change. Over the next decade, the Point began transforming into a working-class neighborhood as immigrants from Ireland and Germany poured in looking for opportunities afforded by the bustling river trade. Butchers, mill laborers, and weavers set up shop on what is now Story Avenue. Nowhere near as luxurious as the stately homes found on Fulton, but just as important. As the city has remained in flux from its founding, these shops and homes were relatively short-lived, many of them demolished when Beargrass Creek was rerouted in 1854 from its original outflow near 4th Street, directly into the heart of the Point. It was during this short lifespan of the neighborhood that Christian Heigold's enduring work was created. Arriving in 1850, Heigold purchased the property located at 264 Marion Street and began building his mansion, one that, by the end of the decade, would be quite different from those lining Frenchman's Row. Unfortunately, it would be a mansion inspired not just by hope, but by one of Louisville's darkest moments as well. Which brings us to the Know Nothing Party, a nativist, anti-immigration movement and political party that rose in America and whose influence peaked during the 1840s and 50s. Though officially known as the American Party, it was the Know Nothing moniker which ultimately stuck. The unofficial name, the result of members being required to exclaim, "I know nothing," when asked about the party. They were certainly right on that account. They, indeed, knew nothing of the American dream, nor the role immigrants played in building the city of Louisville and our nation as a whole. The Know Nothing Party reached its nadir in August 1855. Know Nothing Party members stormed the Cathedral of the Assumption after rumors that German and Irish Catholic immigrants had hoarded weapons in the basement. It got worse on Monday, August 6th, Election Day. Armed Know Nothing hordes spread to the polls to intimidate voters. What followed was a day of unimaginable violence, as German and Irish immigrants were assailed by the bloodthirsty mobs. Catholic immigrant neighborhoods were targeted. Around 4 p.m., a crowd of know-nothings, armed with shotguns and rifles, began laying siege to the German parish of St. Martin of Tours. Soon after, a row of houses on Main Street was set ablaze, the properties between 10th and 11th Streets having been owned by an Irishman named Mr. Quinn. The horror only escalated. Those attempting to flee the burning buildings were shot dead by know-nothings. When the fog of madness finally drained from the city, many had been killed, many more injured, and countless properties reduced to smoking rubble. The repercussions from this terrible event were felt for decades and decades afterwards. You could argue still today. At the time, Irish and German immigrants comprised a third of Louisville's population. Following the murderous riots of Bloody Monday, those demographics would experience a seismic shift, as over 10,000 citizens soon fled Louisville, often heading to Chicago, St. Louis, and Milwaukee, anywhere more welcoming. Many argue that this mass exodus forever damaged our city, once on its way to becoming one of our nation's most important and influential. The skills, old world traditions, and big dreams of those that fled were part of Louisville itself. Their loss a grievous wound to the soul and future potential of the city. Heigold was devastated. How did it come to this? How could they not see what immigrants such as himself had brought to the city? He was now keenly aware of both the beauty and fragility of this experiment, a blossoming flower so easily wilted if not properly cared for. Heigold saw an opportunity. His mansion, still under construction, would be completed with vision, with purpose, a call for patriotism from an unlikely immigrant. It would be a physical testament to his love of country, his country, the United States of America. The German stonecutter spent years carving detailed scenes of our nation and its forefathers into the home's facade. Included in these scenes are family members, a powerful declaration of the immigrant's role in shaping our nation's history. Above the front door is a scene depicting George Washington alongside the ladies of justice and culture. It includes the following phrase etched in stone. George Washington, the first president of the United States, the man whose greatness has never been surpassed, to whom Americans think their freedom and the world owes its love and esteem. Heigold's patriotism extended to his newly adopted city as well. Carved, directly above the entrance, are the words, "Hail to the city of Louisville." Heigold also honored the present. He highlighted those he believed were fighting for the America he loved, the America that others would deprive him. A bust of President James Buchanan speaks to his position on the political climate. He was greatly inspired by the presidential hopeful who had been running for office while Heigold was building his mansion. But it was not Buchanan's presidential aspirations that animated him, but rather the would-be president's fierce opposition to the Know-Nothing Party, a party which stood for everything that Heigold was against, a party that despised immigration while failing to see the crucial role it played in our young nation's success, a party that spread the flames of its hate throughout the city of Louisville, both figuratively and literally. To Heigold, Buchanan was a knight trying to slay this dragon. His bust, located by the second-floor window, is accompanied by the words, "Hail to Buchanan, now and forever," and "The Union forever. Hail to the Union forever. Never dissolve it." Construction on the home itself had finished 2 years before the events of Bloody Monday. However, Heigold carved the historic ornamentation in the months afterwards, and continued carving his patriotic scenes up until his death in 1865. He left the mansion to his son, Charles, who lived there before passing away in 1925. Repeated flooding from the recently diverted Beargrass Creek eventually led to the relocation of most of the Point's residents. The floods of 1933, 1945, and, in particular, the Great Flood of 1937 only accelerated the neighborhood's decline, each flood destroying more and more homes never to be rebuilt. By this point, Louisville had stopped providing flood assistance to the remaining citizens, hastening their retreat. Soon after, the city ceased all construction in the area. Combined with the lack of municipal support, this meant that the Point was well and truly dead. And yet, the Heigold House remained, intact, unbroken, a testament to the resilience of its maker and the immigrants who had once breathed life into the once neighborhood. Only the Paget House on Fulton Street could say the same. The city of Louisville purchased the remaining properties in 1953, demolishing those still standing to make room for a dump site. Recognizing the historical importance of Heigold's creation, a two-man committee composed of University of Louisville art history professor Dr. Walter Crease and a mayor's assistant named George A. Hendon Jr. intervened, both working with a construction company to carefully document 315 assets belonging to the mansion's facade. Once complete, they disassembled and reassembled the facade, transporting it to a new location in Thurston Park, once at the river's edge. Though now just a facade, a front with no house, Heigold's message had been preserved. It's a message that seems more relevant now than ever, a patriotic vision where all may contribute to the growth of this nation. But it's also a sobering reminder of what Louisville might have been if not for the misplaced anger and fear of misguided, hateful mobs. In 1978, the Heigold House was listed on the National Registry of Historical Places. Since then, it has experienced one other move. The 70,000-pound facade was carefully relocated across River Road to its current location in 2007. Today, you can find the Heigold House facade at the entrance to the Waterfront Botanical Gardens. It is a fitting place, a peaceful place. History handmade in another era, woven today into the cultural tapestry of this extraordinarily, albeit flawed, city. It's easy to imagine that Christian Heigold would be glad not to just see it survive, but stand where it does today.
On August 18, 2010, a heavy wooden crate was delivered through the front door at the Frazier History Museum in downtown Louisville. It was a big day in the museum's history, and as such, members of the press, public, and a few Civil War enthusiasts watched as curators and crew removed the protective layer to reveal a large limestone monument. At about 3,500 pounds, structural engineers were consulted to determine the safest possible location for it to rest, Something this heavy could go crashing through most floors. At the monument's previous locations, the earth beneath it was more than strong enough to support its size. But at this point in the monument's history, it could no longer remain outdoors if it was to be preserved. Known as the Bloedner Monument, it still sits on display at the Frazier and is arguably the most significant object at the museum. Yes, it is the oldest surviving monument from the American Civil War, but that's just scratching the surface. Being the oldest Civil War monument in America is just part of what makes this object special. It's also the story it tells, one that speaks to the struggles and the successes of immigrants in mid-19th century America. To anyone who viewed the Bloedner Monument on that day in 2010, the 5-foot-tall, 5-foot-wide stone would look the same as it does to the many visitors who see it today. But that's not how it looked when August Bloedner carved it in 1861. Once sharp and detail-rich, a century and a half of weather had left it worn and pitted. Yet some of the detail is still quite clear. Carved in relief on the face of the monument is an eagle, wings spread and clutching a cannon in each talon above stacks of cannonballs. And flanking the eagle are American flags set against olive sprigs and oak leaves, symbols of peace and strength, respectively. However, the tablet, which was once heavy with text, is not so clear. Words that were carefully carved with hammer and chisel in flowing script are today nearly indecipherable. Of the visitors who study the puzzle before their eyes, only a few notice the remaining words are written in a foreign language. The oldest monument from the American Civil War is written in German. But what it once said is not a mystery. Along with the list of about a dozen names and dates of birth is a paragraph. Translated, it reads, "Here rest the first martyrs of the 32nd, the 1st German Regiment of Indiana. They were fighting nobly in the defense of the free Constitution of the United States of America. They fell on the 17th day of December, 1861, in the battle at Rowlett Station, in which 1 regiment of Texas Rangers, 2 regiments of infantry, and 6 pieces of rebel artillery, in all over 3,000 men, were defeated by 500 German soldiers." During the 1840s and 1850s, waves of immigrants came to the United States. Many were Catholics from Germany and Ireland. In response, a nativist movement espousing anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic sentiment took root. You heard about them in the previous story. The Know Nothing Party, also called the American Party, became a powerful political force. According to the Know Nothings, these Catholic foreigners wanted to foist their false religion and its anti-Christian laws on America. On August 6, 1855, an election was held in Kentucky, and Charles S. Moorhead was running for governor on the Know Nothing ticket. Rumors that foreigners and Catholics had interfered with the voting process spread. Supporters of the Know Nothings formed mobs, and the mobs swept the city, beating and killing German and Irish Catholic immigrants and looting and burning their properties. One of the worst occurrences of violence that day took place at Quinn's Row, about a block from where the Frazier stands today. This was the site of the fires and snipers detailed in the first part of this episode. And as you already heard, Bloody Monday led to migration from Louisville that weakened the city's economy for years. A few years later, the Know Nothing Party dissolved due to a split over the slavery issue. However, the widespread fear and distrust of Catholic immigrants remained. In November of 1860, Kentucky native Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and soon Southern states began to secede from the Union. On April 12, 1861, a Southern militia bombarded Fort Sumter in South Carolina, forcing the U.S. Army to eventually surrender the fort. Thus began the American Civil War. As the nation plunged into war, Lincoln issued a call for 500,000 volunteers. Many communities rushed to lend their support to the Union, and one of those communities was the German immigrant community. Feeling they needed to prove their loyalty as true American citizens, Germans across the U.S. rallied. In states such as Ohio and Indiana, Germans successfully petitioned the government to form all German ethnic regiments. They wanted to show what patriotic Germans can do. On August 12, 1861, Indiana's governor authorized a German Revolution veteran named Colonel August Bloedner to organize the 32nd Indiana Infantry Regiment, unofficially called the 1st Indiana German Regiment. Fondly nicknamed Papa Willich, his reputation attracted hundreds of ethnic German volunteers to Indianapolis to join his regiment. Many were immigrants who had settled in Indiana, and many had military backgrounds in Europe. Entire companies arrived from Evansville and Terre Haute, Lafayette, and Madison. Others came from outside Indiana, including Tennessee, Ohio, and even the Germantown neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. On October 1st, steamboats carrying the regiment docked in Louisville, and over the course of the next 5 months, the regiment would travel as far south as Hart County, Kentucky, making repairs on railroads and advancing the Union's interests in the area. In early December, Union forces launched a movement towards the Confederate lines along the Green River near Munfordville, Kentucky. The rebels countered by partially destroying the Louisville and Nashville Railroad Bridge over the Green River. This was a crucial line for the Union as it connected Louisville, a Union stronghold. Members of the 32nd Indiana crossed the river while others worked to build a temporary pontoon bridge. The Battle of Rowlett Station near Munfordville, Kentucky, began when Confederate cavalry attacked on December 17th. The Confederate forces were much larger, but a strategic location worked to the advantage of the Union and the 32nd Indiana troops. The battle was relatively indecisive, but the 32nd Indiana kept control of the area, including the bridge. This ensured the movement of soldiers and supplies on the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, which was crucial to the cause of keeping Kentucky in Union hands. There were casualties on both sides, and as with many Civil War battles, it can be hard to determine a definite number, but most agree that the 32nd Indiana lost about a dozen men, some of the earliest losses Kentucky would see in the Civil War. America was only 8 months into the bloody affair, after all, with no real idea of how long it would go on. One of the survivors of the battle was a private named August Bloedner. Born in 1827, August Bloedner would have been around 34 years old. Likely an elder among his fellow infantrymen, he had come to America with skills acquired in Germany's School of Fine Arts. Originally from Altenburg in the German Duchy of Saxe-Altenburg, he attended the local arts and crafts school for 4 years. And in 1845 he left Altenburg for Dresden, entering the highly respected Royal Academy of Fine Arts, but withdrew before completing his studies. Germany was changing at this time, and the seeds of revolution sprouted across Europe. Bloedner came to the United States in 1849, like many others, after the revolutions in Germany failed. He eventually settled in Cincinnati, and soon after the outbreak of the Civil War, Bloedner enlisted in the Union Army in Indianapolis. Signing on for 3 years as a private, he was assigned to the 32nd Indiana Infantry. It is fair to assume that he acquired his stone carving skills during his time in school. This was a skill he would put to use not just before and after the war, but also during. Following the Battle of Rowlett Station, Bloedner and the 32nd Indiana Infantry remained near Munfordville for several weeks. For reasons we can only assume, Bloedner was compelled to honor the men lost from his regiment. They would be the first soldiers permanently memorialized during the American Civil War. Working diligently while camp life happened around him, Bloedner carved the 32nd Indiana Monument. It was installed on the battlefield in late January 1862, marking the remains of those men who fell. In 1867, 2 years after the end of the war, the monument and the men it commemorates were moved to Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky. There, it stood for 140 years. But a problem slowly appeared. The limestone Bloedner pulled from the area for the monument was St. Genevieve limestone, a soft and porous rock that doesn't hold up well to years of weather. By the 1950s, the monument was already beginning to deteriorate. In the early 2000s, nearly half of the inscription had been completely lost. A century and a half of exposure to the natural elements was taking its toll on the historic marker. The monument, now known as the Bloedner Monument, was in grave danger. In December 2008, the National Cemetery Administration acted to preserve what was left of the monument. They moved it to an indoor storage facility at the University of Louisville, where it received professional conservation. Then, on August 18, 2010, the National Cemetery Administration moved the Bloedner Monument to its new home at the Frazier History Museum in downtown Louisville. Today, visitors to the Frazier History Museum can see the Bloedner Monument on display in the Civil War Gallery in the permanent exhibition, The Commonwealth, Divided We Fall. August Bloedner returned to stone carving after the war until his death in 1872. But his most notable effort remains this monument, the first and oldest monument from the American Civil War. It just so happens to be written in his native tongue, a foreign language in America, in honor of immigrants who took up arms and gave their lives to defend the free Constitution of the United States of America.
This episode of Kentucky Wide was written by Jason Berkowitz and Simon Miners. Music and production by Mick Sullivan.
If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and listen to the rest of the series, and share it with anyone who might like it. And of course, come visit us at the Frazier History Museum.
We'll be back before you know it with Season 2. Thanks for listening this far. Until you hear us again, we'll see you at the Frazier.
I'm Mick Sullivan.
I'm Sarah Jemerson.
And this has been Kentucky Wide.